questions. Is anybody still out there?
No, that was amazing. That was incredible, actually. Thank you so much, Lemon.
Very
Um,
thorough.
so
Thank you. I
thorough.
enjoyed that. It was something I probably should have done in 2019, and it's taken me until like 4 years later, but here we are.
Does anybody have any questions? I know one of my questions is because it is really strange that on Earth we have such primitive tools, and like you said, we have such fresh fruit and things like that. Do you think that there is a change of nutrition between like the colonists and people who live on Earth?
I mean, yeah, potentially, because we're looking at, as I said, colonies that are smaller scale, really, than like continents or countries on Earth. And they clearly have a lot more agriculture condensed into a smaller area as a result. So your food miles are going to be shorter, which means you can do things like use less preservatives. You can, assuming you're not shipping it off your colony, you can grow thinner skinned varieties of things. You can leave them to ripen on the plant, um, which could result in very vastly different nutritional benefits. And if people are eating on Earth, if they're eating very basic foodstuffs, as I said, other than rich people, we don't see anyone eat any meat other than like those advertised microwaves, burgers and things,
It's
in
fun.
Russia. And we have grill mentioned, but we don't actually see anybody in the poorer areas or in space other than endless waltz with the meat burn eat meat. So there could be a lot more vegetarianism is another possibility. And we also don't see much animal agriculture, nothing obvious in space. It could be there, but they obviously didn't zoom in enough for us to see it. But again, you could extrapolate that they just don't have any animal farming in space. So they could all be vegan.
I think because this thought did occur to me because you mentioned cows, and I'm like, I can't, for the amount of resources that a cow would use, I can't see you using an animal much larger than a sheep on a
Yeah, I
colony.
mean, even sheep would probably be difficult because sheep, like traditionally, sheep are farmed in areas
They can
um,
roam.
where they can roam, but also where crop quality is poor. Like your drive to change to herding is either down to some kind of status given to people who own those animals, wool in the case of sheep because it has a value, or it's to do with the fact that you just can't grow crops. Like there's a lot of sheep farming in Wales, there's a lot of sheep farming in Australia. What do they have in common? They're hilly or they're deserty. You're not going to be growing huge amounts of like oats, barley, right, grain staples there.
Right.
Um, so there's various reasons why you might choose to have animal agriculture, but if arable is working really well for you and it also reduces the fact that people might then die of disease in a big tin can in space, it may not just not be worth it. And it might also
Right.
depend on your social interests as well. L4, maybe they don't have any pigs.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And another thing, because this is something that they've been doing scientifically recently, is growing meat in labs.
Mm. Yeah, I touch on this in my meta actually. So there are synthesized milk and meat and fish products, and these are fully synthesized from either genetically modified yeasts in the case of milk, but they fully mimic animal milk in that it's got lactins in it, so it acts like milk, it tastes like milk, it cooks like milk, without having to come from a cow or any other mammal. And there are meat products which again can be grown from uh, yeasts and another like um, mycological products. Is kind of mushroomy stuff, a bit like corn, but corn on steroids. Um, and that you can kind of grow and it can make like ground meat simulants. It's not particularly good for that. They are also looking at taking animal cells. So you take a
Yeah,
very small
they've
amount of,
started doing that.
yeah, they have. You take a very small amount of cow cells or a few other types of animal, and then you can grow that in a lab. Now, the issue with that is it's quite hard to scale up. And the other issue with it is it requires obviously a laboratory setting, very clean, very secure. And it also requires a hell of a lot of plastic, a hell of a lot of glass. You know, if you think for everything you're producing, that actually might be quite challenging if you have other supply issues. Like, where are you getting your plastic from? Where are you getting your silicates from? And these have to be laboratory, you know, where are you getting your borosilicate from? You're going to struggle potentially to do that. So there are arguments for and against that, I think, in Gundam Wing space colonies. And in Earth, to be honest, right now we're still debating whether or not that is really realistically the future. Technology can improve, but Gundam Wing still uses floppy disks, so you know.
There's only so much you can
Shave,
fix.
drink.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. First off, yeah, I really love this presentation. It was really well thought out.
Thank you.
Yeah, could you go back and elaborate on, I think you made this point about how maybe perhaps the colonies specialize in certain types of production or their output. I don't know the term, but I think you mentioned something about how maybe one colony specialized in agriculture and then maybe the other cluster would specialize in producing another type of food or something like that.
Yeah, not quite. I think looking at the colonies, so L1 seems to be pretty much like, here is our city, here is a big lake, here is some agricultural space, and they're very like split up. Like, looking at this is hugely densified. This is like downtown New York or like the middle of Abu Dhabi. Like, you're jostling with people all over the place, and the only greenery, the only space you have is like, maybe it's more like municipal open space for playing sports and walking and breathing some air. That's not to say that they don't have maybe vertical hydro farms in some of this. Maybe they do, but it's unlikely. Based on what I know about urban planning, it just seems massively unlikely. And then they have these sections which are split up and defined into sort of weird sections. So these could be biosecurity walls, actually thinking about it. So they could be doing something in that. And then they have these big like plots within each quadrant, and each one has a couple of buildings on it. So they're all doing stuff. We just don't know exactly what. Some of this could be pasture land, I suppose, but you know, the bits that are closer seem to have like rows on them. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell. You just have to kind of best guess is they're farming stuff. And then they have these green lungs along the side of each colony, which are full of trees. There's just nothing in there but woodland, treeland planting. And then so this is L1, this is L1, this is L4, and you can see it's slightly different. So they have urban centers, but they're a bit more like one big building, some stuff, and then more green space with trees and bits. This looks like it's sort of a bit more like industrial maybe, which makes sense because they're very mining based. But it's not quite the same as like this, which is just all of the buildings and then other stuff is elsewhere. So L4 again here. So we have plots of people living relatively close together, some sort of medium density building. And then we have this other sort of mysterious green space, which is a lot more accessible to the people who actually live in these tower blocks compared to whichever poor chump is living here. You know, they've got to walk a really long way to get to anything. They've got it virtually on their doorstep. But this again doesn't really look like farmland. This looks more like it's sort of municipal green space of a different type of quality. This is an urban park. It's maintained and, you know, manicured and it looks like every other big city park you've ever seen. This looks a little bit more left to do its own thing a bit. It's big swathes of grass that just do their thing. And then Buffet's colony has got the significant dieback, and that's not got much by the way of sort of blue infrastructure other than this like river that meanders through. And then they've got like sort of consolidated density of build over here. But we don't really know what they farm here. We just know that they're going to struggle because of how much their colony is failing. So I hope that kind of answers what you were asking. Oop.
I just noticed the others bringing up an interesting point in the chat. Their guts, specifically the gunnipods, have to be wrecked.
Oop.
With all the
sharing my screen.
With the going back and forth, because 4 of them are from the colony, so their gut microbes would be used to the kind of food and water, honestly, that is on the colonies. It's probably a lot of recycled water. It's probably recycled and reclaimed, probably. So you get to Earth, and Earth has microbes and bacterias everywhere in everything. And there's only so much you can prepare for. Like, even on Earth, going from one region to another, you have issues with water. That's got to be on a whole other level, going from a fairly sanitized space colony, it has to be, back down to Earth.
Well, I guess that kind of raises a couple of assumptions. So there's nothing, again, just going back to the evidence in the show, I've got nothing to say either way how that would go. So I think you can run with that theory however you so please. There's lots to play with there. My take is, I think you're right. Because of biosecurity, the water on space colonies is going to be heavily recycled. It's probably going to be not very tasty, but most of us are already living with that situation, right? We all live in kind of urban areas with public tap water that may not taste the tastiest, or actually maybe for some of you it's not that safe. But I think I'm willing to assume that the space colonies have probably sorted that shit out, because it makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more resource efficient to make sure that your piped tap water is potable. Earth, we see actually a lot of quite pristine coast. We see quite a lot of pristine water bodies. So there is some potential for the water there to be of reasonable quality, particularly given that population densities seem to be quite low as well. So you've got a smaller population competing for less, for more water sources. But as you say, there could be more potential for the water systems to be more archaic, because we already know agriculture is more archaic. So why should we assume that, water supply and sanitation are better unless you're with the military? Because I would like to think that probably Oz, and with the Rockefeller backing and the alliance, they're not going to waste time losing battles because their soldiers are all shitting themselves from, bacterial dysentery or something crazy. It could actually be more likely that the mineralization of water on Earth is sufficiently different to give you a tummy upset. Because I think what I've heard, when medical professionals of the world, please correct me, but I have heard this, that actually the mineral content, or the change in mineral content, can upset you just as much as bacterial content, if we're just talking purely about water. If we're talking about other stuff, I mean, I think we've all had that experience of maybe going somewhere else and the milk tasting different. If you're a milk drinker, if you've traveled, maybe if you've experienced this, it is kind of bizarre to go to another country and be like, milk tastes weird, milk tastes different. So I think there'd probably be that kind of culture shock as well, that things that would be otherwise familiar to them taste different. I'm trying to think what else. Because it's quite possible that the food varieties they're growing in space could be reasonably related to or similar to varieties on Earth, because we don't have huge amounts of difference in commercial products now. So extrapolating forward, would they develop new strains to work in space? Maybe. If they were doing hydroponics, I would say almost definitely, but they don't seem to be, so hard to say.
hydroponics there would be a difference, but when it comes down to, say, fruit and veg, probably slightly less, if only because with fruit, particularly apples, peaches, cherries, and stuff, you can graft. There's probably
exactly.
a fair amount of that could be done in the colonies. And with vegetables, you're very reliant on seeds, and because you want seeds to be consistent, there's generally not a lot of variety.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is if they've got controlled growing spheres and they don't have to worry about food miles, transportation, blah, 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 they could actually farm different varieties because they don't have to go for those. Like a lot of commercial growing choices are made on whether or not it can be transported. If you remove that from the equation, maybe they start farming for different variables. And because they've been in space for long enough, they could have had a divergence. Or maybe it's like overseen by some kind of like seed corporation, naming no on earth real life examples, who has patented everything and has fucked you up that way. So you only have one variety of potato, and God help you if it ever gets to some kind of disease.
Well, we saw what happened with the bananas twice.
Yeah.
Lemon, may I ask, how long did it take for you to complete this presentation?
I sat down to do it after Boxvolun told me I was doing it. And then I basically spent...
Kindly I did.
Yeah, you were very polite about it. I did sign up for this. I didn't have my arm twisted too hard, and it didn't take me much convincing. I sat down the first evening and I went through episodes 1 to 20. I did not watch them in full. I skipped forward at 10-second intervals, like a little Morse code operator, just going hammer and tongs at my forward bar. And I did that for the first 20 and took screenshots, and I dumped them all in the presentation. And then I did that twice more to get through the rest of the series, maybe 4 times. And then I kind of like lumped everything into groups of what kind of I was picking up. And then I just added some text. So I guess all in, I don't know. I don't want to say how many hours, probably more than I think. It didn't feel like it took me that long.
Like a week's, like working on it for a week, give or like.
I guess so. Yeah. It was probably a couple of weeks all in because I didn't do it every day.
Right. Why did you decide to focus on food for Gundam Wing? Is it just something that stands out to you when you're watching media, like how they use the food, or was it? Yeah.
Oh, I'm just massively food obsessed.
Yeah.
Really the long and short of it. No, Belks asked me if I was interested in a presentation and of the potential topics I could have done in order to meet this deadline, because originally we were talking about me maybe doing it on the 13th. I was like, I'm gonna pick, excusing the pun, the low-hanging fruit of something I've already kind of done. And I was already posting that meta at the time. I'd been editing it and adding it onto AO3, so I'd already started that before Box even asked me. So I was like, right, I will take from that. I will use that as my foundation. I'll build on that, and that'll probably make a good presentation. So that was the process. My usual chaos.
You use a lot of food in your writing as well.
I do, yeah. I love a food analogy, and also I get bored, and then I'm like, what are these chumps gonna do? They're gonna sit down and eat something tasty, damn it. But then I get the joy of writing about a nice meal, or a terrible meal. Maybe it's a terrible meal, but it's meaningful.
Bread and apples, everyone.
Yeah, and I've done that multiple times in my fanfics. I've got a lot of food-based fics lurking out there. Even my non-food focused fics usually have a bit of a meal or a snack somewhere in there because I can't help myself.
Yeah, sorry, it's just because your presentation was reminding me of so many other stories or media that would use food to symbolize a theme or something. Like, yeah, you pointing, how the food obviously represent the different classes and who was in power. Like, it reminded me of Gundam, not Gundam Wing. It reminded me of Hunger Games, and also in the movie Parasite. I don't know if you've seen that Korean
Yeah.
movie that won Best Picture. Like it reminded me of that, and like
Old Boy, where he sits and eats the live octopus when he gets out of prison, where he's been wrongly jailed for like
no,
10 years. It's like iconic.
yeah, that's Old Boy, but with like
Yeah.
Parasite too. Like for those of you who have never seen it, it's like a bunch. It's obviously about how capitalism oppresses us and makes us all leech off of each other. The poor family, they infiltrate a rich family, and like when they finally start earning sorry, what's the word, disposable income, you see that their food at home, when they're eating in privately, it starts to get a little bit better. Yeah, so stuff like that. And then I also like how you mentioned you just put food in everything you do, and then that's making me think of Quentin Tarantino movies, because he always has one scene in his movie where the food just looks amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an enduring symbol of so many things. Like as I said, food is fundamental. Everybody eats, no matter
Yeah.
where you live on the world. Everything we do is kind of, and our cultures have kind of been guided by how we eat, what we eat, when we eat, and where we get food from, and how we source it, how we cook it. It's all kind of part and parcel. It dictates our days, even down to the timings of our days. And it's like an enduring thread through all kinds of media. Like, we talked about red apples in this. Well, what's the most famous apple in the world? It's the it goes all the way back to, you can pull biblical themes into this if you so please. Fairy tales constantly talk about food, like the pot that pours out whatever meal you want, or the golden apples and all kinds of stuff. It's as a society, as a human, as a species, we're all obsessed with food.
Yeah, 100%. I still remember this one thing, my in a sociology class, the professor said how breaking bread with other people is like a universal thing. And
yeah,
it's probably sounds like the most obvious dumb thing you could say, like the sky is blue, but yeah, no, to me that just resonated with me, because I just never thought about it, that yeah, it's just, you just sit down with other people and you eat food with them, and it's just like it's a form of connection and everything. And it's used so much in storytelling that way too, not only to depict hierarchies or how rich or poor a character is, but like when you're eating with somebody else, it's like you're bonding with them, because you never would like sit down with an enemy and eat, right? That would yeah, you only sit down with the people like you care about, or at the least can tolerate, and you share food with them, right? So
yeah, rules of hospitality and finding similarities and differences. Like there's a great passage of one of the Roman writers, and he's describing the barbarians of Britannica, these sort of the old Britons, the tribes of Britain at the time, and he describes how he thinks they're deplorable because they get drunk on this foul smelling liquid called beer. It's utterly uncivilized, and they fight. They love fighting at dinner, which he also thinks is hugely uncivilized. But he notes that a stranger can turn up and they don't ask who he is; they just give him dinner, which is entirely un-Roman. He's like, that is mind-blowing to me, because we'd want to know who they were first. We're not that generous. He's a really interesting writer about that. I think what you said about the sociology of it, we often talk about food, we also talk about what it symbolizes, we talk about nutrition and diet and things, but the psychology of eating together is also hugely important. So NASA did a study where they had a group living in basically a great big bubble in the middle of the sea to simulate being in space, and for one part of it, or one group they did this with, they just gave them like I want to say MRAs, is that what they're called? Like the meal rations. And everyone had their own individual portion. And you just
MRE.
open the pack. MRE, thank you. MRE is a brain scan, isn't it? They gave them those, and you just opened it and ate your portion 3 times a day. And then they kind of like recorded their feedback on how they felt about all kinds of things, like who did they get on with, who didn't they like, how do they feel emotionally each day, what did they think of the food, blah, blah, blah. And then they did another test where they gave them MREs for some meals, and then for at least 5 meals of the week, ingredients sufficient for a person to cook a meal for the group. And they asked everybody to take turns cooking for everybody. So it was like a dinner rota. And what they found was completely like chalk and cheese reactions to living in this bubble. They were satisfied for longer. They made closer friendships and bonds. And they found that their mood throughout the day improved rather than went down, because they had something to look forward to at the end of the day. And it also tallied across the week, because Wednesday was taco night. And they got to look forward to taco night, eating tacos with everybody. So, like, as you say, it's massively water is wet, no dirt. But at the same time, it's something that I think is really taken for granted a lot in society, mainly Western society, I think, particularly where we have these sort of breakdowns of like communities, because we're all living in big urban areas and we all have to like do our own thing and hustle our own hustle to get by. And we're not doing these things where we sit down as a village to eat anymore. But I thought that was really interesting, and it just kind of underlined exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, no, completely. It's really interesting. Like, what are your thoughts about the fact that we don't ever see anyone eat anything until like Duo takes a chomp out of that dumpling? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe if it says anything about the show? Because like, for me, I always, even in film school, my teacher says every time you see a character eat on screen, even if it had nothing to do with the plot, it instantly humanizes them. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We see the good guys eating. We only see the bad guys like boozing or occasionally having a coffee. Like we see Zex having a coffee when he's changing, he's moving away from trays. So that's one thought. Put that in your pocket. My second thought of why don't we ever see anybody eating a meal is right, it didn't go there. Just we have other shit to do. We have a war story to tell. It's got a lot of politics. We have a tiny deadline, and we just fired the producer. Possibly one of the factors.
I think a lot
and
of
then
Oh, go ahead, Lemon. I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, my other one is that it could be a conclusion. Like we never see anybody sit down and sort of peaceably eat together. We see Kathy serve soup. We never see them eat it. But the fact that Duo, who, if we know from episode 0, has a history of food and shortage, getting to sit down and eat a meal, I think is actually quite a telling sort of conclusion to the story. And I do quite like that. I should have gone through Endless Waltz, but I just ran out of time to do this presentation. But it's something I will do. It's my homework. Yeah, that's next year. Sorry, Say, jump in. What were you going to say?
Next time. But it is kind of a similar thing to your point of there's a lot of room for us to play with, and that is kind of the joy of Gundam Wing, is because they were so focused on telling like specific events and things and perspectives, it's kind of left the world open for the fan creators to go, okay, but what if? What is this? And when play with a lot of this comes down to they just didn't think about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or they took it for granted, like using floppy disks. Like they have no way of knowing that solid state drives are going to be a thing in 20 years.
Yeah. Hilde,
so they're working with what they got.
They're gonna make a comeback. They're gonna make a comeback, guys.
But yeah, it's just ease of writing. Hilde enters the scene. Oh God, we have to give some context of where she's come from and why. She went to the store. What did she buy? Apples.
Bread.
Bread. There's one little artist out there who's like, I can draw bread. But I did also think maybe the sheer quantity of alcohol and coffee and stimulants that are shown, other than smoking, because Japanese anime will not let you show people smoking, if it's targeted at a younger market. Maybe that's just a sign of what the producers and animation team were living off of.
A little bit of projection.
Yeah, it's like, oh fuck, people are starting coffee. I'm gonna draw the coffee.
Because like another way that you could look at it, because we see drinks everywhere, but you don't see a lot of solid food, is maybe a lot of food is liquid processed.
Yeah, particularly in space, we see a lot of space drink, but it's not branded of anything. The way that the coffee and tea on Earth is very specific. They draw teapots and they draw coffee pots, and they are notably distinct. It's very easy to look at that and be like, that's a teapot, that's a coffee pot. We've got context. What they're drinking is tea and what they're drinking is coffee. We don't get that in space. We just get miscellaneous space drink. So yeah, they could just be drinking Huel.
Like Diane said, space protein shakes.
Soylent Green.
Yeah.
Okay,
Soylent
maybe
Green.
not Soylent Green.
Before we go, I wanted to say that Noor also said I have to go, but she wanted to share one of her favorite food related things that Lemon has written, which was the Kaba apple sunset. How do you say that?
Cab apple, the most important ship that this fandom has ever produced, which is the enduring love between the cabbage and the apple and the pineapple. Sorry, the apple interferes. It's between the cabbage and the pineapple. And someone dared me.
It was
I was about to say, how did that love triangle resolve itself?
The apple never got any action because it concluded after 3 parts, and I think the pineapple died. Spoilers.
Oh God.
I know.
Spoilers.